Hey Paul, can you hear me okay?
I can hear you now. Can you hear me?
I sure can. How you doing?
Good. How are you today?
Doing very well, thanks. All right. If it's okay with you, I'd like to talk, maybe 5, 8 minutes, just kind of get a
Okay.
feel, and then we'll jump into the interview, okay?
And and just remind me, kind of the audience is financial professionals.
So it's going to be financial professionals, small and medium business owners, and the larger business community that's been impacted by COVID is the
Okay.
primary audience right now.
Okay. And y'all mainly do this through online newsletter, online magazine, or interviews like this from a conversation perspective. Is that right?
So a lot of it's going to be conversational through interviews like this. And with the way COVID has impacted the business landscape, we are thinking about pivoting a little bit from the online newsletters and the online magazines and a couple of other things. We
Okay.
are still ironing out all the details there, though. One thing that I have discussed with a few of the other participants to be is we are looking at generating a 1 to 2 page expert insight report from each interview with a mugshot, a quote or a stat that you really like, and then just basically a short transcription of our call. And then
Okay.
you'd be able to share that through your network. Just a nice, simple graphic. How do you feel about that?
That's fine.
Okay.
And um, just to be clear, I guess when I filled out the form, I'm speaking more from controls perspective, not really answering PPP or legislative type questions. Is that correct?
Yes. Yes. We won't be asking you any
Okay.
kind of like legislative or tax advice
Okay.
or anything like that.
Okay.
Okay. So you said you wanted to discuss that finance leaders need to pay more attention to risks in the organization as far as internal controls and tech go, and that both can pretty much instantly take a company off the rails.
Absolutely.
Okay.
I think that, but go ahead. Did you want me to respond or did you want me to kind of, or you had another question? Sorry.
If you don't care, could you flesh out the your thoughts on that front really quick?
Yeah, absolutely.
Thanks.
I think with the move to a remote workforce, organizations are focused on, and rightfully so, focused on maintaining the business, focused on keeping their current employees or keeping their current status. That is taking precedence on a lot of things, as it should. Um, what we are trying to communicate, or what I'd like to communicate, is that organizations should not forget about the control aspect of their business. And I guess I'm speaking to more that already have some sort of control environment in place, where they have policies, procedures, controls in place where people review information, where people are reviewing reconciliations, doing reconciliations on a monthly basis. Sometimes that kind of gets pushed to the wayside. And the conversation is really just don't forget about that in this time. We've moved everybody to more remote workforce, so a large amount of staff are going to be um, unsupervised for the most part. And when I say unsupervised in that we don't watch each other work, we're not passing information back and forth physically. It's all done electronically. And when that's the case, sometimes controls get laxed. And we just want business owners to remember that if you have a good established control environment, making sure that it's continuing, and where it needs to alter, it needs to alter. So understanding where your risks are. Cash is a big risk for organizations right now. That's what they're focused on. So instead of a monthly control of reconciling cash, maybe you move that to a weekly, if not a daily, just to try to help yourself understand where you are, and you don't have surprises that come weeks down the road. Everybody's going to be focused on kind of that cash burn of their organization. And so if you have reconciliations that are done, maybe you move up the frequency of those reconciliations. So what that statement really means is understand where your risks are to your organization, understand what controls you have in place to combat that, and then where you need to alter those controls for this period of time when we're working in a way we've never worked before. Does that make sense?
Just to make sure I've got the right context here, a lot of this is in the budgetary and cash flow sense in terms of controls, correct?
It is. It's more of the financial controls of the organization, how cash comes in the door or how cash goes out the door. Both need to be reviewed.
Then it makes perfect sense, everything you've said so far. I've got a little bit of background in like cybersecurity and stuff, so when you say controls, I think a couple of different bents, but I'm tracking.
Well,
So,
and I also have a cybersecurity background
okay.
as well. I'm a CPA, financial statement auditor for 11 years, but for the last 5 years, I've run our risk and controls practice, which includes IT reviews, which includes cybersecurity concerns of an organization. One of the controls from a cybersecurity perspective that people need to think about as well during this time is privilege and who has what rights to what systems and what software and what information. Least privilege is something you and I would know a lot about. A lot of organizations, especially small organizations, that don't have the opportunity for segregation of duties or don't have the opportunity to have a bunch of people doing certain controls or within a software, just give everybody access to everything. And now is a time when not everybody needs access to everything because opportunities are going to arise, unsupervised employees, or just opportunities to go get information and either sell that data or use that data for another purpose than what it should be used for. And so access to software, if somebody has administrative rights, maybe right now they don't need it. Just thinking about that from a controls perspective as well. You can't really talk about controls without talking about, now that technology has taken over the world and that we're using it more and more now that we're all remote, you can't talk about controls without talking about those types of cybersecurity controls.
Would you be comfortable giving just a really short, maybe 30 seconds to say 3 or 4 minutes blurb on like principle of least privilege and some basic best practices for data loss prevention? Because that's another big concern that I have for some of these small organizations.
Yeah, I mean, least privilege is the understanding that people get as little privilege as they need to be able to access data and access systems. If all of the financial information and check accounts are maintained in a certain area of the system or of the software, and people don't need that every day, then they shouldn't have it. Likewise, if you have, for a small business, if you have 2 or 3 people and you have one person doing AR and you have one person doing AP, maybe they don't need access to see the other side of that, right? So segregation duties comes into play where you've got somebody that's controlling the cash coming in and then controlling the cash coming out, and that gives them the ability to manipulate the situation. Least privilege concept is really just if I don't need access to it, don't give it to them, and monitor the access that they do have and make sure that it's the appropriate access is one piece. From an IT environment perspective, your second question is really just data loss. Now is a time when people are going to be faced with opportunities to manipulate any type of situation. And if they need a little extra money and they can sell the data that the company has, they could go out and they could get it and they could take it and move it across company boundaries, whether that's physical or virtual. And so monitoring that type of activity, making sure that, some companies go as far as USB drives are shut down so that you can't transfer information through a USB port. And from a virtual perspective of that, people shut down Dropbox and some share filing applications, because if I can go grab all of my financial information and go stick it on my Dropbox, quit today, tomorrow, I've still got all the information that I needed to have. And so making sure that activity is monitored is something we always talk about when we talk about IT controls and good data loss prevention techniques. Is if you see something unusual, Doesn't matter if I'm talking about fraud, if I'm talking about cybersecurity. If you see something unusual, it probably is unusual, and you probably need to investigate it. From a controls perspective, we talk often about detective controls and preventative controls. A preventative control is not allowing people the access to move information. A detective control is monitoring the activity that people are doing. So somebody goes and downloads 2 gigabytes of PDFs. Does that make sense for their role within the organization? And if not, they really need to step back. The organization needs to step back and go, okay, that seems unusual. I probably should have prevented it in the first place, but now that I've seen it, I need to respond to it. So least privilege and monitoring of activity, I would say, are the 2 big preventative and detective controls organizations can put into place as it relates to data loss risks.
Okay. Awesome. I really like the way you've taken everything. Are you ready to start the formal interview?
Yes. And I assume, is the video going to be, can I correct myself? Are you going to edit, or is it just kind of a straightforward thing?
We can do some light edits. Mostly it's pretty straightforward.
Okay.
Just do what's natural.
Okay.
I'll probably have a few stutters and hiccups too. All right.
Well, and I have 3 children. I have 3 children, and they've all been instructed to read books for the next hour because I have a 1:30 meeting as well. So,
Gotcha.
but let's jump into it.
Sounds great. All right. Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining me again on The Beacons. I am your finance host, Matthew Profit, and I'm here today with Paul Perry, a CPA with Warren Averett, and do that one more time.
It's
Okay.
Warren Averett.
Averett, gotcha. Thank you. Okay. Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining me again on The Beacons. I'm your finance host, Matthew Profit, and I'm here today with Paul Perry from Warren Averett. He is a CPA and a security risk and controls leader, and he has expertise in IT as well as some data loss prevention. Thank you for joining us today, Paul.
Thank you, Matthew. Glad to be here.
So I know you've been working for a very long time in the finance space, and one of the things that a lot of companies right now are working to focus on is figuring out how much money is coming in, what's their burn rate, how is it coming in, and how is it leaving. Could you share a little bit about some of the best practices that you've seen companies take in tracking these controls?
Yeah, absolutely, Matthew. From a cash perspective, just monitoring the activity that an organization has as it relates to cash, making sure you have good controls around the cash coming in the door, the cash going out the door. That is all extremely important. And putting some of those financial controls in place really helps an organization monitor, again, that activity. Where we might do reconciliations on a monthly basis, organizations are starting to put into place where they are doing reconciliations on a weekly basis or a daily basis, because they want to make sure that cash is being spent the way it should be, that it's not being mistreated or misappropriated for any reason. And now, while folks have a workforce that is mostly remote and somewhat unsupervised from an ongoing daily perspective, it's more important now than ever to make sure that whatever control environment you have in place is being handled, is continuing. Where you need to adjust it, you adjust it. But for the most part, just making sure that control environment is steady.
From what I understand, the way things have been working, especially having worked with some of the DoD contractors in the aerospace, defense, and cybersecurity sector, one really common thread was, don't do silly things like write your passwords down on sticky notes and then just, paste them up on your monitor.
Right.
And it's increasingly tempting to do that when you're at home and nobody can call you out on it. Do you have any advice for organizations to keep their information safe, whether it's the data loss prevention practices or some of the more general security controls?
I do. I'm going to put those in 2 different buckets. It's really a preventative control and a detective control, right? So from a preventative control perspective, organizations from a data loss perspective should look at the access people have, whether it's access to a system, access to software, access to an application. Is that the right and appropriate access? We in the business call it least privilege. I should have as little privilege as possible. If I don't need access to the information, I shouldn't be given access to the information, because I could manipulate it in some way or misappropriate it. So least privilege is the access people have, and it's also the degree of access, right? So a lot of organizations, smaller organizations, sometimes folks have administrative rights, which means they have the keys to the kingdom and they can do anything. A good hygiene for least privilege is making sure that those administrative rights are monitored. Those administrative rights are given out to the right people. And if they don't need it, don't give it to them. And that's really the biggest preventative side, is making sure that they don't have access to data. Another piece of that is access to ways to transfer data, right, from a data loss perspective. So shutting down your USB drives, making sure that people can't stick a USB drive in and just pull data off, quit tomorrow, and then the next day they still have all the information of your organization. And then the virtual side of that is shutting down unwarranted software or websites like Dropbox or other file sharing applications that allow somebody to do just that thing virtually. Making sure that people don't have access is a great way to prevent them from taking data. On the flip side, the detective control is really monitoring of that activity, and you could really put monitoring of activity to cash in and out. You could put it to data within the organization. But a lot of times we don't always monitor timely, and that's the other piece. Is if you've got a report that's coming out on a daily basis that monitors the file size that people are transferring between websites to USB drives to CD drives, whatever it is, if you're not monitoring that on a daily basis, you really don't. You're really kind of shooting yourself in the foot, because 3 weeks from now is not the time you need to know that somebody took 2 gigabytes of data. And so that's the detective way, is really monitoring of activity. A saying I like is, if it seems unusual, it probably is, and it probably requires you to investigate it. And that's really where organizations will sometimes get bit, is not monitoring the activity of folks, and data will go out the door that way.
Well, that's an extremely common practice that I've seen in terms of like corporate espionage type stuff before. And one practice that a former employer of mine actually used was they had a file screening system for their entire email base. And then if you wanted to send anything to like external partners or anything, they had a specific file sharing system that would screen the information before it went out. And then they could catch it that way.
And that's really good for sensitive information too, where it actually kicks it back, right? So if it's got an algorithm that says, oh, that's a credit card number, or that's a social security number, you're not allowed to email that. It does two things. It stops it from going, but then it also, alerts someone that, hey, somebody just tried to send this, which would be a great opportunity for improved training for that associate, right? The other soapbox that I always stand on is security awareness training. And we haven't really talked about that, but that's really the crux of all of it, right? So making sure that people know what they should and shouldn't do. And as an organization, it's your responsibility to make sure that you've told them. If something does happen, yes, it's on them. They shouldn't have done something they weren't supposed to, or they shouldn't have taken something that wasn't theirs. But as an organization, you have to also take the time to do security awareness training. And you can do security awareness training around cybersecurity. You can also do it around security of cash or security of property of the organization. It's all the same thing. It's creating a culture of awareness, right? People need to be told what they should and shouldn't do, and you need to tell them at the same time. You need to tell them over and over, right? They can never hear it enough.
Yeah, just keeping that awareness, like you said, going surrounding the equipment, the financial side, and the information side, because a lot of the time these people are coming in, they get an employee handbook that's 30, 50, 80, 100 pages long. And if you don't do anything to make that information really pop out, grab them by the shirt and say, hey, you got to be careful. Right. They don't read it.
And they go straight to the last page, they sign it and they turn it in.
Exactly.
And I have lots of conversations with insurance agents and with lawyers, and I am neither one, so I'm not giving insurance advice or legal advice.
Right.
But what I have seen in practice is if you have a breach of information, and whether it's physical, whether it's cyber related, and you do not have, and I'll preface this, if you do not have documented attempts to tell people what they should and should not do, security awareness training, physical awareness training, whatever it is, insurance companies and lawyers don't like that. They use the negligence word. Quickly, as an owner, you should have taken the opportunity to tell people what they should and shouldn't do. And when you don't, and you have a loss, the insurance policy is great, but it's a two-way street. Everybody coming to the same table.
Yep.
And I have seen where large dollars have gone out the door, and when there is no documented security awareness training, insurance companies, lawyers pack up and leave, and the company's left with $1 million loss that they can't handle, and they definitely can't handle it in this time right now. So that is another, if you're gonna say there's something you do today or tomorrow, it's sit your people down or get on a Zoom and have a conversation about what they should and shouldn't do, document it, record it, so that if something does happen, you can show the insurance company, hey, look, I did tell them, but they still did it anyway. And so that's another good control folks can put in place.
That's true. And in operating my own business, I've had to, working with Fortune 500, Fortune 100 clients, I've had to speak to several insurance brokers, and they've told me, if for some reason you do have a data breach, as long as you report it to us within X period of time, usually 24 to 48 hours, we'll take care of all of the notification, all of the coverage, all of the everything. But you're right, if you don't have any kind of data loss prevention policy, telling these people, don't do this, don't do that, have the sit downs with them, have the processes in place, they'll just pull out and they won't help you. And that's really scary when you have to notify 300,000, 500,000 people individually, hey, we may have lost your data.
And it's also frustrating that I paid premiums for 10, 15 years, whatever it is. I love how insurance policies had a tack on for cybersecurity issues. Well, that they require their own, because it's probably $5,000 worth of coverage. It's probably, you probably don't have certain controls in place that they need you to have in place. And so that's not enough. You've got to get some folks who really understand the cyber side. And I'm not going to name names, but I've started hearing that some insurance companies are just pulling out of that space. They said, we didn't know how to price it. We lost our shirts. We can't afford to continue this. And until people price it right, we're not going to be in the business.
That makes sense. And especially until people really get the right service-oriented personnel in, like the CISOs, the really seasoned people in the security space, the insurance companies just can't afford to, because nobody knows what they're doing.
Right. And one thing, since we're talking about insurance, the other thing we saw with one client was insurance companies require, either during the underwriting or inside the policy, it says these are the security controls you should have in place for this policy to be valid. If you make false pretenses on those, we saw one organization that had to answer 15 questions during underwriting. They answered them all yes. We walked in and we debunked 10 of them. And they went to their insurance company and said, hey, we just had an outside party tell us that these 10 are actually no. What do we need to do? And they said, you've got 6 months to shore it up, and they've got to reassess it. And we helped them, and they were upfront about it with the insurance company. They said, look, we thought we were doing the right thing. We obviously didn't answer them as we should have.
Right.
But what was nice, and I think what the insurance company did nice, was they said, well, since you kind of self-reported, we're going to give you a little time. We're going to give you 6 months to fix it, and you're going to give you 6 months to reassess. And now they're solid. And that's the problem a lot of small businesses are going to get into is, oh, I've signed a premium for $1,000 a month for cyber insurance, but I don't know what I'm supposed to be doing outside of having the insurance policy. And so that's really a place where businesses can get bit in that they've spent a lot of money for something that's not going to benefit them.
That's true. And especially having all of the informational freedoms that we have right now because of the coronavirus outbreak. and all of the people working online, the increased system strains, all the extra stress here, it's extremely important for these people to be able to have some resources that they can go to and figure it out.
Absolutely.
Do you guys have any low cost or free or reduced price maybe offerings that you have for some of these businesses?
You know, when we do an IT review, it can run the gambit of a checklist that people respond to, and we give them best practices around their no's or their NAs or their no, I've never thought about that, to full-blown IT exams and reviews that's looking at the entire IT environment, whether it's on-prem or in the cloud. So, we offer a wide range of just kind of different steps that organizations can kind of get into. And we know that this is a tough time for folks, and, where we can and where it makes sense to maybe just, here's a checklist that we've created on, the top 40 things you need as an organization. Tell us the ones you don't have, and we'll tell you the best practice. That can be done very simple and easily, and sometimes over the phone. But it's definitely important to find the folks that understand it, know what they're doing, to try and help you find those best practices. There's a lot of frameworks out there that people can follow, whether it's COVID, whether it's NIST, whether it's some of the stuff that the DoD has for CMMC that's going on right now. So there's a lot of frameworks for people to follow. The problem is a lot of folks just don't understand what those frameworks say. And so that's where we kind of step in and help them understand what controls from a cyber perspective they need to have in place.
Fantastic. Are there any closing comments or stats that you find particularly motivational or good, or particularly upsetting that you've seen over the last few months?
Yeah, I would say that organizations that aren't prepared for a data loss attack, whether it's cash or whether it's true data that's going to cost them money, ransomware, anything of that nature, any of that gambit, organizations that have small businesses specifically that have a breach of some kind are out of business within 6 months. There's a stat that Inc.com put out years ago, and it's continued to remain the same. And I would say that kind of pushes up in this time frame, right? So what they said was 6 months, is now 2 or 3 months. People just can't handle a ransomware for $50,000 and $200,000 to restore their systems. And if they don't have insurance, then they're not covered. So some of that is out there, and it's scary stuff. Organizations just need to go back to kind of the premise of the conversation. People need to understand their risks. Organizations, for the most part, especially some small businesses, they don't know where their risks are. They don't know where their holes are. They see the tip of the iceberg. They don't see everything under the water. And so sitting down and saying, how can I lose my business, or how can I run out of money, or how can I be hacked, and knowing what those risks are, and then knowing what controls are in place to combat those risks is 50% of the work, right? So you got to know where your risks are before you can know what you can shore up. A lot of organizations don't do that. So I would say if any organization listening to this is going to take something away, it's sit down and do a risk assessment, get somebody to help you do a risk assessment, know where your gaps are, and then just educate employees over and over and over. And once you've done educate them again. I come from a business background, retail background. They always used to say location was important for businesses. And in the security world, I say it's education. You cannot educate it enough. So knowing what your risks are and educating the folks on what they need to do to combat those risks, organizations can get 50% down the road just from doing that.
That makes perfect sense. And regular training is extremely important just to keep people
Absolutely.
refreshed. One final closing question for you, and then I'll let you go. Are you familiar with the concept of a red cell exercise?
Yes.
Would you recommend that any maybe more than 20 member organization, sort of bridging the gap between small and small to medium business, put together some teams within their organization to figure out ways that they could make their business fail, or that they could set up a competitor inside the organization to help with some of these controls and find out better ways to do stuff?
I would say yes, and that really goes to the risk assessment piece. How do I know where I'm going to fail? I need to figure that piece out. So setting up folks that try to bring down, red hat folks from a cybersecurity perspective, that's pen testing, that's outside folks trying to get your system in an ethical manner. That needs to be top of mind for folks. A lot of folks don't do it, A, because they don't understand it, B, they don't like the cost of it. But it helps you understand your vulnerabilities, and you really can apply that to anything. How can cash go out the door? Figure out how you would steal cash. Now let's make sure we have controls in place to combat that.
My thoughts exactly. Well, thank you so much for your time today, Paul. It's been awesome
Thank you,
having you
Matthew.
on the show,
Appreciate it.
and we look forward to hearing from you and keeping updated with you in the future. You have a good weekend, okay?
You too. Stay healthy. Bye.